shorts already? Yeah. Would have worn them at that dinner last night.
Welcome everyone, thank you for your patience. Getting our audio visual set up. Today we have Travis Howerton doing this afternoon's breakout session, Modernizing NNSA with Cloud Mobility and Unified Communications. So I'm just going to briefly introduce Travis and then he'll lead a discussion and presentation. He is the CTO for the National Nuclear Security Administration and Chief Information Manager for the Y12 site office. Within the NNSA, Howerton is responsible for technology direction and strategy for a large distributed IT program with an annual budget of approximately $1 billion. He also serves as the Federal Project Director for a suite of enterprise IT solutions ranging from wireless networks, manufacturing automation, cloud computing, unified communications, and enterprise resource planning systems. So thank you, Travis, for being here today.
Thanks for having me. So just a little bit about me and NNSA before we get started. So first, NNSA is the National Nuclear Security Administration. We're entrusted with the safety, security, and reliability of the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile. So we take security very seriously in what we do. I'm the Chief Technology Officer, so I sort of have technology, strategy, and vision for IT investments and where we're going. Work directly for the agency CIO, Mr. Osborne. We're sort of a sister organization to the Department of Energy. Our appropriations flow through them. So if you saw Bob Breeze, Pete Saronis, those guys, we're partners in crime. We work very, very closely together. A little bit about me. I am not the political guy, the give you all the canned answers guy. I'm the nerd. And so I'm just going to kind of tell you what we're thinking about, why we're thinking about it, how we're tackling some of these challenges, and give you some real-world feedback from my perspective on what we're doing and why. And since this is a small venue, I'd like to have sort of an interactive dialogue. So don't feel like you have to hold your questions to the end. If you got one, let's just have a discussion around it, and we'll go through a few things. So first, this transformation we're trying to deliver is coming through something we call Right Path. And I'll talk about what that is a little later. But what we found is anything you're trying to do that's important in the government is difficult. There are, if you're trying to go do something that's fundamentally different than the way we do it today, you will get a lot of help. And you will get a lot of help from people who help you in very unhelpful ways, right? And they don't mean to, but we are very good at following a certain script. And when you break out of that mold, it's very difficult sometimes to react in an agile manner that's responsive to the mission needs, which is part of why we stood up the Right Path framework. And we think it's important that we become more agile because, in my view, there are 4 defining technologies today that are going to rebuild the IT toolbox for the 21st century. They'll foundationally change both the way services are delivered on the backside in your IT organization and how they're received from the user or customer side on the front. And those 4 things are cloud computing, mobility, social computing, and big data analytics. All 4 of those things are part of a new toolbox. If you look at where the digital strategy is coming from OMV, these used to be kind of separate work groups, separate thoughts. I think there's a convergence of all these technologies together and an understanding of you really have to be thinking about them all in an integrated way. And the HP CIO has a saying that choosing is losing, and I believe that. You can't choose to say, I'm going to do cloud this year and then next year I'll think about mobility. You've really got to tackle them all concurrently in an integrated way. So just some examples of why that's important. So cloud computing, one of the basic tenets of cloud computing is broad network access to a shared pool of compute resources. Right? So if you have broad network access, but you don't enable any sort of mobility within your agency, you've really sub-optimized the return on investment of anything in that domain. Right? So we're thinking you've got to put all these things together. These different 4 skill sets are part of that new IT toolbox of the 21st century. But it doesn't mean that the people I have on staff today are trained and knowledgeable of all these skill sets in a way that they're going to immediately feel comfortable going forward. So there's a whole lot of work we have to do to enable these technologies, which gets us into people, process, and technology. So on the right path side, we're this agile and lean service delivery framework. And I say those two words together for a reason. So on the agile side, it's all the rage. If you're in IT and you haven't heard of agile, you're a bit behind the curve at this point, right? But everybody's agile. But if you're not lean, so I came up in the business process reengineering side, lean, Six Sigma sort of approach in the private sector before I came to government. If you're automating stupid, you really have nothing much to brag about, right? You really got to start with how do we deliver this service in the most efficient way, and then how do we use automation to improve the effectiveness of that delivery or lower the cost point of that delivery. You got to do them both together. And you've got to do it by combining people, process, and technology. I'm blessed to work in the NNSA where we have a collection of national laboratories, which are really national treasures. Whereas most places you go and you say, well, that's not possible, you can't do that, technology doesn't exist. National labs are just getting warmed up. They eat that stuff up. So they love to go invent new tech. The downside of them is they don't understand business models or anything like that, or whether it's going to be profitable or usable. They just want to do something that's never been done before and then publish it, right? That's kind of what they do. So we're combining that people, process, technology. On the people side, we've got to train our people, and we've got to learn how to teach people fundamentally different than how we do today. So what I found in government, and I don't know about the private sector and how training's done today, but we are really good at writing user guides. Click this, and then fill this form out, then click this, and here's a step-by-step process to go through. And that's great, and you kind of need to do that. If you're UI simpler, you need to do less of that. But what we really never train people on is why they should use the technology. So what is it about this capability that we're delivering that's going to make it easier for you to do your job tomorrow, and why would you want to use it? Because in government, it's a lot harder to mandate to people what you're going to do. You'll get sort of entrenched against in that mode. You've got to teach them why they should use it, right? What is this whole social networking thing? Why is this going to be important to me when you deploy it? What can I do easier with that? Why do I care about cloud computing? So a whole lot more why, a whole lot less how. On the process side, I hit on that a little bit. The lean side, we got to make sure we have good processes in place, and I kind of throw policy into that process. We have a whole lot of policy that's 20, 30 years old that doesn't really recognize agile methodologies and doing things fast. So if you say, I want to go to cloud computing, I want a shared pool of resources, I want shared services, out of that, then you run into procurement that says spread all the money around, give most of it to small business, and don't do anything shared, right? And so you have these two conflicting sort of drivers that we have, you know, socioeconomic drivers and technology and cost drivers that kind of get in the way of one another. And then if you do those two things right, the tech part's actually easy. With our industry partnerships, our lab capabilities, the tech problem is never where we've dropped the ball. I can't remember one project in my 8 years in NNSA where the tech didn't work, or our engineering couldn't figure out how to make the tech work. It was always on those front two sides where we dropped the ball. So what are we going to do this next 12 months using RightPath moving forward? So we don't want to boil the ocean, but we took a step back and said, all right, if you take those 4 capabilities I talked about in the new IT toolbox, how are we going to combine them in a way that's going to solve real business problems for us? So what does this technology mean to us? And we came up with 3 discrete initiatives. One voice powered by your cloud over the OneNSA network. I'm going to talk about each of those in more depth later, but One Voice is basically a better way to collaborate. Unified communication stack integrated with a business-focused, internally hosted social network. I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. All hosted and our infrastructure as a service cloud offering over a new wide area network capability that connects all of us together. To do all of that inside of a year in the government is a challenge. And so really we had to put our A team together, which is the RightPath core team. I have the honor and privilege of being the program manager for that, in addition to sort of my CTO duties in NNSA. And we've got a collection of really smart people. Our chief architect who's looking at how do you architect each one of these components so that they'll be interoperable based on modern standards, all that sort of tech piece. He's got a team that he leads, is Neil Carmel. Operations is Robbie Green, so we're looking at, once it's designed, how we're going to turn that over to operations, train people on it, and maintain it long term. We have policy and partnerships with Pete Saronis, who's looking at what policy reforms do we need to put in place to support these sorts of investments. If you haven't met Pete, he's actually going to do the lunch keynote. Very dynamic speaker, world-class guy, think the world of him, so you're in for a treat during lunch today. And then cybersecurity. As I said, we're the nuclear weapons guys, so there's nothing we do that we can't secure, period. End of story, don't even try. So on our side, we want to make sure that we're doing the right security, but we don't want to do it in a very inefficient way. We had typically CNA point solutions at sites. What we're trying to do is bring that up to an enterprise level and CNA core infrastructure that everybody can leverage so that you pick a plan versus write a plan, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's more important. So what are some of the things that you get as value-added services out of RightPath? So one of the first ones is just program management. From an overall perspective, and I've heard it several times since I've been here, we're really good at optimizing a specific solution to a point problem. And we're very good at setting agency-wide strategy, but there's this middle gap that pulls them together that we drop the ball. We're not very good looking across the portfolio and making sure we don't have redundant investments to make sure that things are going to interoperate between some of these point solutions, between lines of business. Some of that next level up stuff is where we kind of drop the ball. So RightPath is helping there. So we want to be consistent, eliminate redundancy, and a big one for us is we are building a very robust set of project controls, metrics, dashboards around how this is done, so everybody has insight based on your role into what's happening, which isn't something we had before. On the architecture side, everything kind of begins and ends in this stuff on the architecture. If it's not designed properly, it won't work. We're working very close with our EA folks. Rick Lauderdale's here, the DOE Enterprise Architect, another very, very smart guy who's supporting us that I'd encourage you to meet and talk to. And we think using a good enterprise architecture approach, we can not only deliver this faster, but we can do it at much lower cost than we otherwise could. And finally, policy. You've got to have that top cover, if you will, in policy to say it's okay. I view a lot of our cyber security program very much like our nation's legal system. So if there's precedent, if a judge has ruled on it before, it's very easy to do it again. But if you are setting a new bar in cloud computing or in mobility that nobody's ever done before, God help you. It is a lot of work. You know, everybody has a lot of opinions about what's going to be good enough. Nobody's ever established it, right? So setting that policy base that Pete's working is very, very important to make sure that we're not constantly moving the goalposts. I don't want to get into the red zone, be ready to turn the project over, and somebody move the goalpost again, right? So we're working that up front. This is a bit of an eye chart, but it's a high-level view of how everything fits together. What you saw there was 3 discrete initiatives, but those 3 discrete initiatives are part of an overall departmental agency type strategy. And what we're doing is looking at how does all these things come together in a new and integrated way. And it starts on the left for us with identity management. So if you don't know who your users are, if you don't have a level of assurance and trust in your identity management solution and how you bring people in, everything behind it, you're kidding yourself. You put all the tools you want in there, but if you don't know who your users are to make access control decisions on and authorization decisions on, you're in a bad place. So we've got 2 projects there I'll talk about. And we've got really 3 pillars of our overall strategy. 2 the NNSA network vision is the transformation engine. That's where we make changes to our as-is architecture to add new capabilities, and I'll go through each of those 3 pieces. JC3 is the Joint Cyber Coordination Center. This is basically a SOC NOC type function. It's a way to make sure that we are monitoring, that we are sharing information, that information vulnerabilities rolls in to that 2 engine. But it's a way of sort of operating and maintaining what we've built. Because we're the nuclear weapons industry, we are very, very interested in the future. So I'm not worried about exploits that come next year. That's just the price of admission that we kind of think a couple years out. We're doing research of what will exploits look like 25 years from now. So here's an interesting dynamic that we get to deal with that almost nobody does. Our classified information doesn't expire. So 25 years from now, you won't go to Wikipedia and find one of our bomb bills listed. Not going to happen, right? It would be a very bad thing for the country and for the entire world as a whole if that was to happen. So we've got to be looking at tech that our theoretical guys say may be invented, and then what would that tech mean to our architecture, and will we be secure 25 years from now? Because literally, we've got people capturing packets today that they try to break 25 years from now. That's the kind of threat that we're worried about. So our cyber sciences lab is how we do next generation cyber defense. It's a partnership between our national labs, industry, and academia, where we take some of what's come out of JC3, these are our threat vectors. This is what our theoreticians internally are saying is coming down the pipe 10, 15 years from now. How do we work together on what I'll call signature programs that may be in a very black box, I'm certainly not going to talk about it here, of how we look at some of these things, of how we defend in the future. So that's sort of our three pillars, and we have some cross-cutting things. Underneath it, we have a concept called sustainment. How do we make sure that we're building sustainable IT solutions? We are sister sort of sub-agency to the Department of Energy. So anything we want to do, we do. We want to make sure we're good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars and that we use the most environmentally friendly things. So we fuse things together with a set of integrated dashboards there. We're pulling all those transparency metrics I talked about in that same set of dashboards, operations, things from JC3, and a little bit around smarts, which is our interactive intelligence concept. So one of the things we think is going to be cutting edge into the future, and more in a big data domain, is how do you take data and analytics that you have in business, social, and cyber, fuse them together to make better decisions. So if I've got a business-focused social network, I know a whole lot about your social graph, who you talk to, what you talk about, and even how you speak. I've got a whole bunch of data around business today, and we're getting more and more data around cyber. How do I take the intersection of those three sets of data to make better authorization decisions? So if I'm talking to my deputy, Anil, at 2 a.m., we're both vampires, that is not unusual. If I'm talking to my Bob Osborne at 2 a.m., that's not Bob. Right? I can tell you somebody has rooted his machine and has some sort of exploit. Bob is not awake at 2 a.m. Right? But you don't see those things in cyber tools. You see those things in social graphs, right? So you can understand the context between the domains and make better decisions. So we're looking to partner with industry and academia on algorithms of how you fuse those things together to provide higher assurance for our infrastructure. And we think when we put all this together and we're done, the brand around that is vForce 21, a virtual workforce for the 21st century. I'll talk a bit more about that, but we believe that work is something you do, not somewhere you go. Right? And Bob Breeze has said that, the new DOE CIO, that's resonated with me, but there's some societal implications to that we'll talk about a little later. So from a technology overview, this is another eye chart, but it kind of shows logically and notionally how some of these things come together. So at the top, you've got any device connecting to our core network, our new wide area network, whether that's wired or wireless. A consistent way to authenticate, some federated authentication model, to a common set of compute infrastructure at the bottom, which is our cloud, which is logically carved up in a multi-tenant sort of approach, infrastructure as a service to our constituents. And then we have to manage it and secure it on the left, which is where more of those JC3 type functions come into play. So that's logically a high-level representation of how we see all these efforts sort of coming together. And in the shared services enclave you see down there is where you would see the one voice type capabilities being hosted for the agency-wide capabilities. But that's how we've carved it up. And so what are some of our notional timelines? This is what we are baselining to. And so when I talk about agile and lean, I hate 5-year projects for $100 million and say, if you just give me all this money, you won't believe the awesomeness in 2016. Right? And they're speccing down to the model that they're going to buy in 2016. Nobody has that. Nobody is that clairvoyant. And if you're doing it, you are really dropping the ball. Because there's this dirty little secret, and maybe some of you know it, industry moves faster than government, a little bit. Right, so we really shouldn't be speccing what industry is going to have available for us 3 years from now. Some of them don't even know, right? So being agile is important. So we're delivering these in 90-day cycles of innovation. So every 90 days, a new capability will be launched. So in fall, the initial operating capability for cloud will be stood up. It will have an interim approval to test. It will be built out. It will be designed based to our specs, and we can let all of our cyber ninjas go bang-bang for a while. In winter, our new wide area network will be built. This will allow all of our sites to connect. We were built in the 1940s. We were segregated from one another for need-to-know reasons that still exist today. But from a logical perspective, there are certain types of traffic we ought to be able to allow to pass. Having everybody firewall off from everybody is really not a good way to do business in 2012. In spring of 2013, OneVoice will be in full production. And by summer of 2013, your cloud will be in full production as an agency-wide capability within the NNSA. So again, 90-day cycles of innovation, always giving our executives new and shiny toys to see, touch, and play with about every 90 days. I think that's a winning model versus the big bang approach at the end where you've got a lot of risk. And in an era of shrinking budgets, you really don't want to be one of those deferred benefit guys. You want to bring your benefits up as quick as you can. So that's been our approach for better awareness of how we're tackling.
So are all the labs on, like, for the network, are they all going to be, you guys are all going to be on the same network by then?
We'll have a new wide area network by the end of winter. So this will be not a wide open network as you would imagine, right? It will be a very tightly controlled network with a minimum set of services enabled to allow provisioning of your cloud workloads in the OneVoice stack. Then we'll have the same MOU, MOA process. If we got a new shared service, it needs to operate in this manner. We'll adjust our network to accommodate that based on the enterprise CNA approach. But it will be a very, very controlled network. So not to say that we've got wide open connections between all our sites, but we can apply that. On the Your Cloud side, let's talk about a little bit what Your Cloud is. Your Cloud is an infrastructure as a service offering based on the Los Alamos National Lab infrastructure on demand capability. Infrastructure on demand is a very large cloud that exists at one of our labs, and it's going into its third iteration. So version 1 of IOD was a private cloud at LAML. It was sort of the next step after virtualization, and they started putting a lot of stuff in it and provided some automation around how you do that. Version 2 was a hybrid cloud, which extended into a commercial space, so you can pick where you want to provision based on the unique needs of your workload. Version 3 will be Your Cloud, which is a secure cloud service broker for a community cloud. So we are, think of it like kayak.com or expedia.com, where we sit on top of multiple potential infrastructure as a service providers, whether commercial or on-prem, and we broker connections to those infrastructures as service providers based on the parameters you put in. How green does it need to be? How secure does it need to be? What type of workload? What are your cost parameters? What area of the country do you want to be in? All those sorts of things will then screen the underlying infrastructure as a service offerings and give you the ones you can provision into. So version 3 will be a cloud services broker. Our initial implementation will have a East and West Coast option, although we envision having more of a marketplace over time. And we have already today taken the process of provisioning a server from months to minutes. So historically, the way we've done this is we buy a server, you go to procurement, they put in an order, it comes in, now you got to put a property tag on, you got to image it, you got to rack it and stack it in the data center, pull the network to it, get cyber to bless that yes, it's configured properly, get an IP, register a DNS, all that stuff you got to do takes months. I don't know about your all's experience, but for us, it's anywhere between 30 and 90 days depending on which site you're at. So months. We've taken that whole process down to 30 minutes with no touch. Right? So that is a very, very real business value, and we've done it while enhancing our current security posture. So if you look on the bottom, we also have a full allocation model. So the way we do cloud computing is different than what you might find in the private sector, where it's consumption-based. We do full allocation because we want to be able to budget. And so this isn't politically correct, and I gave that caveat, right? So statements made by me do not represent the official positions of the NNSA. But when I was getting my master's degree, one of my users, the first things he trained me, he said, you should design everything you do with the premise that your users are stupid. Right? Which, you know, isn't politically correct, but people will find ways to break your stuff in very new and interesting ways that you hadn't planned, right? So what we've done is that we're going to do full allocation. We're going to assume that our users have no idea how much bandwidth they're going to use, all these different things that fall into like an EC2 type modeling or a Windows Azure type modeling. They're not going to be able to figure that out as an end user. IT could, but an end user in a program probably can't. So what we've done is we give them simple sliders. How many CPUs do you want? How much RAM? And how much storage? And then you pick your tier of service, gold, silver, or bronze. And from there, you get a dynamic cost calculator at the bottom that says it will cost you X amount of dollars per month. And when you click submit, your cost center in our ERP gets charged at that time. And the next month, you'll get charged again until you take that off the network. Right? We also got full lifecycle management built in, so you can provision a server for a maximum period of 1 year. We're very good at turning things on, not so much at turning them off in the government. So every year you have to go in, you have to say, yes, I still need that, I'm still willing to pay for it, etc. And we've got a pick a plan versus write a plan approach, which is really the killer benefit to the end user. So we have a failure mode. I don't know what yours is, but what ours is we take a guy in a program who really knows energy efficiency. He may be a postdoc, he may even be up for a Nobel in some cases. And he's really smart, but he knows crap about cybersecurity. And we say, go write a plan and talk about how you're going to meet all these 800-53 controls. And he really doesn't like writing that plan. It takes him like 3 months. And he submits it, it's total garbage. And then we got to go tell this really smart guy who's very powerful that what he did wasn't very good. And so he hates us and we hate him. He didn't like writing it, I didn't like reading it. You know? And by the end, we hate each other. 6 months later, we spent $100,000 on the plan. We still haven't got any actual work done. Right? Sound familiar? Happens all over the place. So what we're doing here is saying we're going to pick a plan. So we have secure enclaves in our infrastructure. So first off, each tenant gets their own enclave, and then within that we have sub-enclaves for, say, PII or HIPAA type data or whatever it is. And so you provision into that and you get a baseline set of controls implemented into the architecture that you don't have to worry about. You're responsible for everything at the OS and up. So you get a sticked OS, you get to figure out how to secure your application, but identity management, all that stuff is handled for you. Eliminates 80–90% of the workloads. Everybody's happy. So what are some of the use cases we have there? Again, rapid provisioning, being able to get something in 30 minutes instead of 6 months. It makes a real difference in people who are running projects, wanting to get work done, wanting to get research done. We get energy savings. Some of these data centers that we have are retrofitted sort of office buildings. I've been in one that has 3 inches of underneath floor space. It's not somewhere people like to work. They're incredibly energy inefficient. So being able to get out of those into modern, commercial, very green data center space has some energy savings to it. Makes data center consolidation very real. CoopDR. Most of our workloads don't do any sort of planning around CoopDR, especially in the research domain. So even at our lowest tier of service, you get daily snapshots at the SAN level, and you can recover back to the previous 24 hours. That's in our lowest tier of service. You just get it for free. You move from CapEx to OpEx. You don't have to worry about buying servers, waiting on that. You just budget for it. And we segregate those workloads again into enclaves. So pick a plan versus write.
Are there any procurement challenges there? Because I know GSA's done this, and there's definitely some procurement challenges. How do you provision? I mean, how do you buy a service?
Yeah, so part of that is what Pete's working on in the policy domain. There's some fundamental things, challenges you have to overcome. One is an issue of fairness. Right, so anything we buy, we need to make sure that there was a fair opportunity for anybody to enter that marketplace. So the fact that we're a broker and we can sit on top of multiple providers helps get to the question of fairness. The other is competition. One of the things we want to put into the broker is a rating system, similar to what you would find in Amazon. So whether it's a software tier or the infrastructure tier, did they really meet their SLAs? Were you happy with it? Did you get what you wanted? All those sorts of things where you'll have user-based reviews that can help inform a competitive process. So we think internally we can get past that by hitting those 2 barriers and updating some policy stuff. If you went broader than just within an agency, I think that would be harder. right? But I think we have a good path forward for us. But I think the fact that we're at the brokerage here really helps there. The other thing that really